will this institution survive the stench this creates? If people think it is all political, how will the court survive? And we can certainly talk about that coming out of this. Now, another trial going on in the United States is the trial of Ghislaine Maxwell, who was the person who was cooperating with Mr. Epstein, who, as we know, committed suicide. And today in the trial, there was one of the people that the prosecution presented was a young woman who, at 14 years old, was introduced to Donald Trump when she was at that age. And she also was the person who, one of the people who was dealing with Prince Andrew. So that case is also interesting. I don't know if it's being broadcast on television right now. We have, in the case of Michigan, we have the suspect of 15 who appeared at the court hearing today, where a fourth person from the shooting that occurred in Michigan died today. And so those are some of the headlines throughout the United States. I'm going to go into the case itself. There, of course, has been more reportage on the panel in terms of the January 6th investigation. There's been a recommendation for a contempt prosecution against Jeffrey Clark, who has decided not to cooperate. We have further news on the back and forth with the deployment of Russian troops in Ukraine. The United States today warned Russia on any kind of possibility of a mass attack on the Ukraine itself. That was brought up by Anthony Blinken, who basically argued at Latvia at a NATO ministers meeting that the situation is quite uncertain, and I quote him by saying he must prepare for all contingencies while working to see to it that Russia reverses course. And again, we talked about that later yesterday. Finally, just to conclude, we have the fallout from Chris Cuomo and Andrew Cuomo cooperating on air. This is the source of much commentary in the media today. And I should note that a very interesting report came out yesterday in Los Angeles, which Kenny can, of course, talk to since he lives there, that 1,500 unhoused LA residents died on the streets during the pandemic. We know that the homeless on the streets in particular were severely affected by the pandemic. But let me share the screen here and go to the opening of the NewsHour tonight, which basically talks about this particular case. This is Judy Woodruff starting the NewsHour tonight. And as you can see, she starts it off with talking about the discovery of a case of Omicron in California.
Official had said was inevitable. We'll delve into the implications of this a little later. But first, the future of abortion rights took center stage at the U.S. Supreme Court. The justices heard arguments this morning over a Mississippi law that bans abortions after 15 weeks of pregnancy. And outside the court building, recognizing one of the most consequential cases about the issue in decades, dozens of protesters on both sides gathered en masse. To break down the arguments and the potential fallout, we turn to Marcia Coyle, chief Washington correspondent for the National Law Journal. She was in the courtroom today for the oral arguments. And Mary Ziegler, a Florida State University law professor and author of the book Abortion and the Law in America. And welcome back to the program. Hello to both of you. Marcia, before we get into the specifics of today, remind us what the justices are being asked to decide here.
All right. The state of Mississippi in 2018 enacted a ban on abortions after 15 weeks of pregnancy. Lower courts struck it down. Mississippi came to the U.S. Supreme Court asking, are all prohibitions on pre-viability abortions unconstitutional, as Roe and Casey have said they are? And it then also asked the court to overturn Roe and Casey, the court's landmark abortion rights rulings.
So it grew from an original question.
It did.
To a much bigger one. And Mary Ziegler, we can't always tell from what the justices are saying what might happen in a case, but what did you hear today from these justices?
Well, going into this case, I expected the focus of the argument to be on viability. And while I was convinced that the court would eventually overrule Roe, I wasn't convinced that they would do so in this case. I thought they might eliminate viability as the line at which states could criminalize abortion, and then maybe work their way up to overruling Roe in a later case. What I heard today was that many of the justices seemed potentially ready to overturn Roe now. Amy Coney Barrett asked questions suggesting that women didn't need access to abortion. They could simply put children up for adoption. I don't think these are questions you ask if you're not seriously considering reversing Roe, which is what I fully expect the court to do, and more likely sooner than that.
Well, let's talk about some of the specifics of what we heard today. Marcia, I think it was clear in the first few minutes of these oral arguments that this case it was one of great consequence. And we heard Justice Breyer raise the critical question of overturning precedent, stare decisis. He spoke in reference to the 1992 abortion decision, Casey, which you just mentioned. We have an audio recording of that. He makes a comment, and then you hear from the Mississippi State Solicitor General Scott Stewart.
What the court said follows from that is that it should be more unwilling to overrule a prior case. Far more unwilling we should be, whether that case is right or wrong, than the ordinary case. It is particularly important to show what we do in overturning a case is grounded in principle and not social pressure, not political pressure.
I would not say it was the people that called this court to end the controversy. The people, many people vocally really just wanted to have the matter returned to them so that they could decide it locally.
And Marcia, I want to now have everyone hear another comment on precedent. This from the conservative Justice Brett Kavanaugh.
I want to ask a question about stare decisis and to think about how to approach that here. If we think that the prior precedents are seriously wrong, if that, why then doesn't the history of this court's practice with respect to those cases tell us that the right answer is actually to return to the position of neutrality?
So, Marcia, precedent is everything.
It absolutely is. And Justice Breyer was quite passionate in reading the section of Casey on stare decisis, which, as you know, is the Latin phrase meaning to stand by the thing. In the context of law, stand by the prior decision. And he said, that...
Gail, what is your comments about this? Because obviously this has been a decisive issue that the right wing has been aiming for decades. Mitch McConnell always has his major victory as being the minority or majority in the Senate whip, if you will, is to essentially accelerate the appointment of conservative justices into all sorts of federal courts, and in particular achieve what he's just achieved in this past several years with Trump in power, and essentially have a majority in the Supreme Court to as one aspect of it, knock out Roe. So what do you think?
You're asking me, I guess, right?
Yep.
I have a lot of thoughts, most of them pretty angry, because it was a long time coming to get that right to have an abortion. I'm old enough to remember. And members of my family had to go off illegally. I mean, this is not a legal argument, but they had to go off to other countries if they wanted to abort a fetus. And, that's a matter, of course, it's highly impractical. And, in theory, if the whole thing is struck down, it's just really, really bad for supposed women's rights. And that's my bottom line on the whole damn thing. I mean, why should women be forced to bear children? Especially because a lot of people bringing these cases are men. I mean, that sounds very trite, but I think it's a reasonable thing to bring up. Anyway, I see the whole thing in general, and this is not rocket science, as an argument that's religious in origin, apparently is some kind of religious perspective. It's not even just Catholic. I mean, the mantra used to be that Catholics were against abortion, and we can't have a churchy argument control the states, right? To control the country. I certainly, anybody who's not brain dead will blame Donald Trump for putting those three justices, who are Catholic as can be, I guess, on the court, or at least two of them are. And we knew in advance that they were going to be anti-abortion. What is this BS with Donald Trump, one of the great womanizers of all time, being interested in making it impossible for women to get an abortion? What kind of crazy argument is that? I'd like to hear a male perspective on that. I don't get it. I mean, this is a guy who's, fully, what can I say? He's had, 5,000 affairs and probably knocked up 2,500 people. I mean, what is it? I don't get it. Anyway, I'd like to say, apart from the religious angle, which frosts the hell out of me, I don't understand. If you're going to argue the viability canon, let's call it, that a fetus is viable at 15 weeks or 12 weeks or whatever, are you really going to argue that that's a case for child support? I haven't heard a bloody word about that one. I'd like to see people in Mississippi, men who knocked up women, and they can't afford or they can't get an abortion. I'd like to see some kind of child support put in place for those little toddlers bopping around somebody's uterus at 15 weeks. That's kind of the counter argument. Nobody's ever going to have the guts to bring it up, but it is. If this is a viable child, then who's responsible for it financially? I'll bet nobody's thought of that. Anyway, besides that, my very last obnoxious point is, what the hell happened to RU-486 in the United States? In France, you could take a pill the morning after. Aren't those pills around in the US? I have no idea. Does anybody know? Like, hello, this was an easy fix. But I suppose some poor little, not too educated person in the depths of Mississippi never heard of such things. This is why I'm giving money to Planned Parenthood. Combat that ignorance. Anyway,
Right.
that's the deal. You heard
All
more.
right, well, Ken, why don't you jump in here? I'm going to try to find out where Alex is and all those guys while you're doing that.
Yeah, well, I was fishing around to see if there's anything humorous, and all I got to say is, you have my sympathies, Gail, that you didn't have a necessity to find out about where to get that pill. But okay.
Gee,
I've always stood on abortion, that I guess I must have been in Greece in an earlier lifetime. The woman should have the right to have an abortion up to 2 weeks after she delivers the child. You could say, I made a mistake, get rid of him. Because just to be certain, I don't want anybody telling me how long I can spend in the bathroom, or, what kind of toothpaste I have to use. You can't tell a woman. I mean, practically it falls to the province of the woman. It's her body. It's her product. That's number one. But number two is, I don't know why anybody isn't bringing up a religious argument that you could be in a part of your religion that you don't want to have this child because it wasn't born in the rising sign of Aquarius or something. You could have a religion and say, no, I've decided I want to abort this child. It's irreligious to have a child, something like that. It is to me, it's like religion crosses over with the rights, the sovereign rights of an individual to make his own decisions. And in the case of a man and a woman here, it falls to the woman. She has the rights. And Alex is now joining us. And let me see if there's anything I want to say about that. I don't know what's going to happen on it, but maybe if it goes one way or the other, more cases could be brought up and thrown back in front of the court of like, what about the woman who didn't know she was pregnant and she has valid reasons for stopping the pregnancy. Enforcing the concept that woman has to go through with the pregnancy it's being enforced. It's a religious viewpoint being enforced on public. You can follow whatever you want. You don't have to have an abortion. You can have the child and put it up for adoption or whatever, but you shouldn't have the right to impose that reality on others. So, but that's enough on that. Alex, did you put that up or is that Jim?
I did.
Okay.
I did.
All right.
I wanted to bring Alex in on this, but also before that, the polling that they're talking about is that only about 1/4 of Americans are in favor of seeing Roe v. Wade overturned. So it's going to be interesting to see how the Supreme Court maneuvers in that political environment with a lot of Americans basically in favor of having it legal. And just to review, all of us remember when Roe v. Wade was passed in 1973. I just wanted to just go over this as we talk about this.
Three of you remember, Jim. I wasn't alive yet.
Yeah, you weren't alive, and I already had to try to have somebody get an illegal abortion, so I remember all this very vividly. And that was in 1968. So here is some of the images from that period of time when people were demonstrating before Roe v. Wade was passed. And here you see demonstrations, legalize abortion in New York City. When
was it passed?
1973. And here are different clinics occurring throughout the country. But here's Justice Blackmun talking about Roe. He said it will be regarded as one of the worst mistakes in the court's history, one of its greatest decisions, a turning point. And here are some people will remember these. Now, remember, the Republicans counterattacked with the Hyde Amendment in 1976, and this was a temporary budget rider that barred Medicaid from paying for abortions. And it passed in the House of Representatives. And then, of course, they tried to internationalize the Hyde Amendment by attaching it to treaties that had to do with the Mexico Treaty, which we're going to hear a little bit about in a minute or two. And then Phyllis Schlafly, of course, was working her tail off. Phyllis Schlafly, for the listeners, is a brilliant and militant conservative activist from the 50s. She was one of the individuals involved with the founding of the John Birch Society, and she took the offensive on the whole question of abortion. And one of the things that was important here is this is where I always argue that we've been living with the counter-revolutions of the 60s ever since. This is a comment from Jill Lepore at Harvard, the great historian who has done a whole bunch of wide-ranging works. Her dissertation at Yale was on King Philip's Revolt, to her amazing path-breaking book on Wonder Woman, of all people, talking about the origins of Wonder Woman. And here, of course, was the issue of the kind of things that Schlafly raised. Schlafly and her supporters argued that 60s liberalism celebrates the individual and promotes the rights of the individual at the expense of the family and at the expense of a kind of moral order. And then, of course, you had this whole abortion issue pass. Here's Phyllis Schlafly. And then it got wrapped up into the opposition to the Equal Rights Amendment. And also in the state of West Virginia, there was a whole bunch of arguments about abortion and reactions to Roe. And then you had, in 1982, you had Pennsylvania passing a Abortion Control Act. So you begin to have this played out in different states. And here we have clashes in Boston between pro and anti-abortion activists. Here are more images of that. And here is Norman McCorvey, who was Jane Roe in the Roe versus case. And remember, she went through a transformation where she then said she was used by the right wing because she sort of had changed her opinion about the abortion situation in general. And then later in her life, she rejected that. She went back to being in favor of the decision of Roe v. Wade. And then they referred to the Planned Parenthood case of Planned Parenthood versus Casey. That was in 1992. That was a litigation against the Pennsylvania Abortion Control Act, which we just mentioned a few minutes ago. This is the Control Act passed in 1982 that required minors to gain parental consent to obtain an abortion, imposed a 24-hour waiting period on women who sought abortions, and required married women to notify their husbands if they were seeking an abortion. And that leads us to basically, and here we had Clinton, we had this issue continue to raise itself. We had in 1993 the assassination of David Gunn, who was shot outside an abortion clinic in Pensacola, Florida. And then you had very extreme divisions in terms of how the abortion issue was handled. Here's David Gunn, who was shot down. This was a famous case. Remember, the guy fled, the person who assassinated him fled into the woods of North Carolina. It took him a while to figure out where he was. They finally arrested him. And then there were several receptionists killed by various anti-abortion activists. And then a doctor was killed in another Pensacola clinic. Two doctors, actually a doctor and a volunteer. Here's the volunteer the doctor who was killed. Here's the actual clinic itself. And then we continue to in 1998, a Canadian man who shot Barnett Slepian in Buffalo. A bomb was exploded outside an abortion clinic in Birmingham in that same year, and it killed, here's Barnett Slepian with his family. He was assassinated. And then you had what Gail was talking about earlier, in 2000, the drug mifepristone. A first pill was available to end pregnancy early in gestation. And by 2017, this particular pill was responsible for 39% of all abortions, but then it became the target of a whole bunch of people trying to prevent it from being used. Then you had in 2007 a upheld ban of dilation and extraction, a partial birth abortion decision, although the court ruled that the procedure was constitutional. And then you had in 2013 Texas passing a law that required abortion providers to have admitting privileges at local hospitals. So that made it very difficult for many clinics to operate. They were shut down. And at the same time that year, in 2013, North Dakota passed the nation's first heartbeat bill, which was a bill that banned abortion after 6 weeks. So remember, all the states have different aspects. And here is a demonstration where you see sort of the city of fervor, an anti-abortion activist holding a figure of Jesus Christ on the cross. Again, the wrapping up of this into domestic politics. And then in 2015, a person opened fire in Colorado Springs on a Planned Parenthood facility, killed 3 people and wounded 9 more. In 2016, Trump's elected president. And he, of course, ran on, as Gail mentioned earlier, it was like absolutely absurd to listen to him argue this. Abortion should be punished, and promised to appoint Supreme Court justices to automatically overturn Roe. So we've had Neil Gorsuch, Brett Kavanaugh, and Amy Coney Barrett appointed, which gives conservatives a 6-3 supermajority. In 2019, you had heartbeat bills passed in Ohio and Georgia. The author of the bills were basically also engaged in essentially anti-LGBTQ conspiracy theory, which was pretty interesting to see this kind of introduction into the abortion debate. And then you had New York responding. Here is a demonstration in New Orleans where women dressed as if they were in the Handmaid's Tale. And then during COVID, you had 10 states attempting to restrict abortion as an essential service. And then, of course, we had the death of Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and replaced by Amy Coney Barrett. And here, of course, is her body laying in state in the Supreme Court. Here are protesters for Amy Coney Barrett. And in 2021, you had Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health Organization. That's the case that's been argued today. And this case focused on whether Mississippi could outlaw abortions at 15 weeks. And most people will argue that the gestation is should be pushed farther back. And in 2021, in the aftermath of the pandemic, or as the pandemic has morphed into other aspects, in this piece in The Guardian, they're talking about this is the most hostile year for abortion rights on record, with more than 90 restrictions put in place by states. And in July, attorneys for Mississippi asked the court to use the Dobbs case to overturn Roe v. Wade. So what we're seeing right now is this kind of political litigation. Now, in September, the Supreme Court let Texas's 6-week abortion ban go into effect while it's litigated, and they halted the vast majority of abortions in the state of Texas. And then they shocked observers again, allowed Texas to implement a 6-week abortion ban, in effect nullifying the constitutional rights granted by Roe v. Wade within its borders. So again, of course, we're seeing the politics of this play out. And let me stop right here and bring Alex in onto the conversation. Alex, your comments about all this?
Oh, yeah, well, again, this course is long-running thing in American politics. It's what, the fiscal conservatives in the Republicans use to get, the religious right to stay in the party and to, be regular voters, even for patently irreligious candidates like Donald Trump. One other kind of interesting case I want to mention that most people don't, since I'm reading this book by on neoliberalism by Wendy Brown, the political scientist, and she mentions this interesting conflict between neoliberalism and kind of theocratic side of the Republican Party, in that, again, neoliberal, again, was going back to Hayek, has this idea of like the family as, if you remember the famous line from Margaret Thatcher, there is no such thing as society. There's a coda to it, which is except for individuals and families. So in neoliberalism, the family and religion kind of stands in for, well, other forces or political forces, kind of propping up morality and the rest. So there's kind of interesting confluence. And she points, there's a series of cases. I'm sure, well, I don't know if you guys know, there are these crisis pregnancy centers that essentially will they'll have ads on the internet, and it'll direct people to these organizations that look like it's, something like from Planned Parenthood or, will give you abortion information. But again, they're basically secretly, again, run by the religious right. And when you, get to them, they tell you everything to, convince you not, to get an abortion and to, go for adoption. But, and they will use very disingenuous, they will lie to the people that call them up. So, a few years ago, well, more than a decade ago, your state, Ken, California, introduced a law that would essentially ban them from lying to people, would force them to, also give, accurate medical information. And so the court, including, again, supposed liberal Anthony Kennedy, they put out, I'd have to look up her book, but there was a court, the Supreme Court decided to essentially knock down this law as unconstitutional on the basis that it was infringing the First Amendment rights of, religious and, in terms of, free speech, of these, essentially asserting a First Amendment right to lie, to for religious reasons, to desperate pregnant women who are looking for a method of dealing with their pregnancy. So again, I think it shows the disingenuousness of the Supreme Court, again, for way before, again, the current extreme right court, again, going back to again, Anthony Kennedy, who was, again, the deciding vote in that case. But yeah, I mean, it just shows the Supreme Court's become, it's become essentially a theocratic institution, regardless of what they say. All the justices are basically ruling the case of abortion and a lot of other cases, essentially on solely religious grounds, solely on Christian religious grounds. And I think it was good to have someone like Jonathan again on who knows the legal stuff more than we do. But I think, again, this is a sign that we're heading towards again, in terms of the law, at least in the Supreme Court, a theocratic society where, again, Christian religiosity will determine, again, these kinds of issues.
All right, Gail, any comments about this?
You got to mute, Gail.
Well, I don't think analyzing it, I mean, I'm sorry, I'm a girl. Saying it's theocratic is total crap. I don't care where it comes from. It's ridiculous. The rest of
Wait, Gail, you muted yourself again.
You got so pissed off you muted yourself.
There's something wrong with my computer. I'm sorry. It's still Windows 7. It flips by itself. I'd like to know, I mean, this is all medical. If you look at it from a medical perspective, forget all the, the Jesus freaks and all that stuff. Forget it. What happens if somebody is bearing a child that is, extremely, the fetus is extremely problematic? It's not going to come out normal. You can't abort it? Really?
Well, and some states are going to, say that. Yeah.
Right, I would think. I mean,
no, because they're a human being, Gail. So they have equal right to life than the mother, than you, if you were to have. Yeah.
I sure as hell wouldn't argue for that. And what about in terms of rape?
Yeah, again.
Either
they
father rapes a 14
or incest. They ignore that. Yeah.
No, incest is good. We like incest, right?
Well.
There's so many issues here that are swept under the rug by this total crap.
Well, to me, Gail, the issue that always kills me with this is that, well, who's going to take care of these kids?
Yeah.
I mean, who's going to be responsible that these children?
Yeah, because these same people, they don't support government, welfare.
The issue of well, there's the responsibility for the society to fine. You bring a kid into the world. Where's going to be the social support for that? And the answer is, of course, zero. So,
Jim, you didn't hear what I said before. If a fetus is viable at 12 weeks or 14 weeks, that means somebody is in a position, somebody, presumably the father, is in a position where he should be held responsible.
Right. So if you do that, they might change their mind, Gail.
That viable 14-week-old infant.
Right.
Any medical costs, any food costs, any costs should be held, it should be covered, I guess you'd say, by the father in most of these conservative states. Now, who's going to argue that? Someone should volunteer, because absolutely a logical extension of the kind of BS arguments they're making now.
All right. Well, before
we should bring Ken in,
Kenny. Well, let me bring Dennis in. Dennis is joining us. But just to sort of further illuminate that, when I would have to go down to family court for years, most of the cases that were in family court were cases over child support that I saw, and in those cases, you had essentially unemployed or poorly employed Hispanic and African American men who were in a situation where they would try to skip out on their child support for all sorts of reasons, including the fact that probably they were unemployed or couldn't afford to do it at all. And the worst that you would get, the longest time you would be held in court, in jail, if you violated these kind of things in family court in New York State, is usually 6 months. They put you in for 6 months, then you're out. You're sent out to Rikers, and usually it's 4 months on good behavior. You're out. But the whole problem was, who is going to pay for these kids? And the irresponsibility of the conservative right all the time is based on some la-la land stuff, which I don't think any of us disagree with. But Dennis, what's your opinion on the debate?
Actually, the argument for that was pro Roe v. Wade was very persuasive for me. So what I would say is that if people want to vote against Roe v. Wade, it's just their own dogma. There's no argument that would convince me that breaching a woman's right to privacy and a right to her own body is less than some other dogmatic arguments. That's personal on my part. I've been pro Roe v. Wade since back in the 70s. So leave it at that. But by the way, I just saw the announcement about 2 minutes ago for the meeting tonight.
Right.
So that's why I'm on right now.
We tried to keep you off, but nothing we could do about it. I have one final comment on this before we give it to Alex. I have a lot of empathy for all the people on this panel, because you're all going to suffer the consequences of your sacrilegious viewpoints. You're all going to be going down to hell in fire and damnation, and I'll see you there. We all agree on this. It's a very obvious thing. It's just barbarism.
Oh no, I'm in disagreement with my church on this. I consider myself still good Greek Orthodox. No, my Greek Orthodox Church is not. They're against them. I mean, they're more flexible on other things, like, well, contraception is okay for various historical reasons. Essentially, they're not as doctrinaire on the issue as.
I think the conservatives and the Republicans really lost any credibility on this when they pushed through funding for Viagra.
Oh yeah.
Like, where
very good. Touche on that one, Kenny.
Yeah.
Okay, Alex, take over. What do you got for us?
Let me.
More involved with helping his brother, former New York Governor Andrew Cuomo, during the ongoing misconduct allegations than was previously known. Now, I'm going to get to my thoughts on all of this in a bit here, but first, let's get to some of these details that just released this week.
And we lost Jim for some reason.
For all of that, this headline here, really weird to see on CNN, but here you go. CNN suspends Chris Cuomo indefinitely. They go on to say here, quote, the New York Attorney General's office released transcripts and exhibits Monday that shed new light on Chris Cuomo's involvement in his brother's defense, a CNN spokesperson said Tuesday evening. Quote, the documents, which we were not privy to before their public release, raise serious questions. These documents point to a greater level of involvement in his brother's efforts than we previously knew, the spokesperson added. As a result, we have suspended Chris indefinitely pending further evaluation. So, will he be back? I don't think so. It's gotten to the point now where I can't imagine, with what has come out, and I'll get to some of the details here in a second, that they will bring him back, especially because of the anger that is apparently going on within CNN. The other journalists there just completely baffled that it's taken this long for CNN to suspend him after it came out that Cuomo had helped his brother behind the scenes during those ongoing misconduct allegations. Now, so before I get to any more details here, yes, of course, they're brothers. Of course, he's going to be supportive of Andrew Cuomo because he's his brother. He's going to try to help him. But the issue here, the main issue here, is that Chris Cuomo used his status, his power as a mainstream media host in helping his brother. So this is really where we get to, I mean, I've discussed over and over again how oftentimes these mainstream media hosts don't actually represent the public when they're reporting on these various stories. But here's a clear example, an undeniable example of him helping a prominent politician, the New York governor, and working actively against the public in doing so. So let me get some more details here.
Would you help us say those precious children right now. We're feeding 350,000.
It's from, again, actually not on CNN. This is from AP News. So the CNN anchor had pressed sources for information on his brother's accusers and reported back to the governor's staff and was active helping to craft their response to the changes, according to emails and a transcript of his testimony before investigators working for State Attorney General Letitia James. Quote, so these are just some of the text messages here. This is, I'll read a few of them. I mean, I'll link to this below the video so you can read through more of them if you want, but some ones that stand out here, this is in the Washington Post. Quote, I have a lead on the wedding girl, Chris Cuomo wrote to DeRosa, which was Andrew Cuomo's top advisor, on March 4th, an apparent reference to Anna Rush, who accused the governor of touching her improperly at a wedding in a story published by the New York Times on March 1st. On March 12th, he sent DeRosa the draft of a never-released statement for his brother to use to explain why, quote, he cannot and will not resign the governorship. Cuomo advised his older brother to say that he understands why the accusations were being made, referring to the charges as acts of political warfare. He wrote that the then governor should say that he understands the conformity that can be forced by cancel culture. So, a couple of things here. First, Cuomo, when he came out and first admitted to helping his brother behind the scenes, he said that, yes, I advised my brother to resign. He did not mention that he told his brother over and over again, apparently, that he cannot and will not resign. And also, when Andrew Cuomo came out and began talking about cancel culture, when all these allegations were coming out, a lot of people just, I mean, we all laughed. It was so ridiculous to try and claim cancel culture when there are these serious allegations being made against you. Well, apparently that idea of using cancel culture came from Chris Cuomo. And he also went on to tell Andrew Cuomo's top advisor, no resign, no resign, no resign. Again, even though Cuomo claimed that he advised his brother to resign, I guess at some point, eventually he did. Clearly, he was instrumental in trying to keep his brother in his position for as long as he was. Now, a little more here. So Cuomo also said he reached out to other journalists to find out whether they were writing stories about his brother, most notably seeking information on what Ronan Farrow of the New Yorker was writing. He acknowledged he didn't tell CNN he was doing this and characterized his actions as nothing out of the ordinary for a journalist. Really, there's nothing out of the ordinary in trying to help your prominent brother, a prominent governor, trying to use your power to pull strings behind the scenes to help your brother.
Okay, so I guess so much for journalistic ethics with Chris Cuomo. And since we have our former Cuomo correspondent here, Gail, I'll throw to her first. What are her thoughts about the Cuomo brothers here? And well, I know, Gail, you mentioned many times Melissa DeRosa, who was mentioned here as well. The governor's aide. So what are your thoughts about all this? Yeah.
She's the daughter of a prominent judge in the Superior Court of New York State, I want to point out. But, you know, this is really kind of a big fat joke, if you ask me. But I disagree with my friend Jeff Gold on this. He thinks it's terrible. Give me a break. You don't think that one journalist talks to another? I mean, that's just foolish.
Well, come on, Gail. Trying to find the names of accusers. You know, that's not breaching journalistic ethics for. Well, and we don't know for what. What would it be okay for Chris Cuomo to hire a hitman to go after? You know, I mean, why couldn't he do that? You know,
you can't do a Fox News trick. It's counterfactual. You can't extend the argument to what if he hired a hitman? That's just silly. It's all First Amendment, Alex. That's what they'd argue in the Supreme Court.
Well, it's not. It's against journalistic ethics, as I'm sure Jim and or Mike would, and maybe I forget. Ken, you got to mute.
Yeah, okay.
Have you some knowledge of journal?
Well, no. Every time I hear you say journalistic ethics, I think of the other enigma, military intelligence. Come on.
Right.
Yeah, what do you mean journalistic ethics? Get out of here. I'd like to see where you got journalistic ethics.
Right.
I totally agree with Gail. This is just gossip column crap.
Okay.
And something like this happened 3 months ago, where somebody was saying, "Oh, it's not right. It's not right." And I'm going like, "Come on, get real."
Governor Cuomo, as much as many people despise him,
yes.
Governor Cuomo has not been convicted of jack shit.
Right.
Oh, he
So,
may be.
if you're going to convict his brother too, let's just go after Fox News first. Let's go after the Murdoch family. You can watch Succession and see their sin.
Yes, Jim's been talking about it.
I think there's so much bullshit on TV that passes for news. Let's bring back fair and balanced. Ask Jim about that.
All right, all right. Let's let Dennis have his word in, and unless Jim's going to come back, which I don't know. Gail, do you know what happened to him? He just got dropped off or something. Yeah. So Dennis, what are your thoughts about? Well, since you're
we don't need no thinking Jim. We go.
You're
on
the tri-state region.
About Chris Cuomo.
Yeah.
Well, and his brother and all this stuff, that's come out.
I think you're dishonest.
Okay.
That's it. I think you're dishonest. That's what I think.
Okay.
I think that Andrew Cuomo was never someone that I trusted ever. So none of this surprises me.
Okay.
I'll leave it at that.
All right. Well, since Jim's not, maybe
go ahead. Go ahead, Alex.
Let's go to this, which again is a good rare bit of good news, which is what's happening in Honduras, where the left, the wife of the former prime minister was removed by Obama in a U.S.-backed coup, is now going to be elected. I mean, she's ahead by so much. And her opponents have conceded, which again, I'm surprised at this, because I figured they would have resorted to fraud to block her from winning. But we'll see what happens afterwards. But so this is Room Democracy now, and Amy's going to tell us what happened.
Co-host Juan Gonzalez in New Brunswick, New Jersey. Hi, Juan.
Hi, Amy, and welcome to all of our listeners and viewers across the country and around the world.
We begin today's show in Honduras, where leftist presidential candidate Xiomara Castro appears poised to become the country's first woman president, putting an end to over a decade of right-wing neoliberal rule. While the official vote count has not been released, Castro holds a commanding lead over Nasri Asfura of the right-wing National Party, which has ruled Honduras for 12 years following the 2009 U.S.-backed coup, which ousted Castro's husband, Manuel Zelaya. Xiomara Castro claimed victory Sunday night.
We are going to build a new era, out with the death squads, out with corruption, out with drug trafficking and organized crime, no more poverty and misery, to victory. The people will always be united. Together, we are going to transform this country.
Xiomara Castro's apparent victory in Honduras is seen as a blow to Washington, which has embraced successive right-wing governments despite widespread accusations that Honduras has become a narco-military regime. In April, a federal court in New York sentenced the brother of the Honduran president, Juan Orlando Hernandez, to life in prison for drug trafficking. Prosecutors also accused the president of being a co-conspirator in state-sponsored drug trafficking. This all comes as Hondurans continue to flee the dire social and economic conditions at home. We're joined now by two guests. Siapa Portillo is a Honduran scholar and associate professor of Pitzer College in California, author of the new book, Roots of Resistance, a story of gender, race, and labor on the north coast of Honduras. She's joining us from Claremont, California. And in the Honduran city of Comayagua, we're joined by Fareed Sierra, who's a high school teacher, has been closely following the elections. Fareed, let's begin with you right there in Honduras. Can you talk about the significance of the apparent victory of what will become the first female president of Honduras, Xiomara Castro de Zelaya?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the significance, first of all, I want to say that it's brought hope to the entire country. I mean, people are celebrating on the streets. I just got back from Tegucigalpa. I was there for the weekend on Friday. People were tense. People were going to the stores expecting something negative may have happened or for the weekend. And when the ballots, the first ballot count came out, people were exuberant. People were relieved. And even yesterday, when I woke up in Tegucigalpa, there was this sense of hope in the country, which people hadn't felt in such a long time.
And Fareed, there were. You talk about the environment on Sunday during the presidential elections. There were some reports of irregularities at polling places, and some people suspecting that the National Party might even try to rig the vote. How was the atmosphere?
The atmosphere was, obviously there were some reports of some incidents happening in certain locations. I can tell you where I went to vote in Tegucigalpa, because each person is required to go and vote in the place where they're registered. And I had to go to Tegucigalpa. And for the most part, there was huge lines. People were really excited to go vote. The place where I went out there, people were they were calm, they were quiet. There was that tension, like I mentioned before, as to not knowing what had happened. Because in 2017, everybody knows that at 4 o'clock, they closed the election places early, 1 hour early. And then by 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, there was fear of there was dismay after hearing the possible fraud that had happened, if anything of actual fraud had happened. So people were excited, and at the same time, people were dismayed, because even on Saturday when I got there were huge lines. The National Party was giving out financial bonuses, so people were still maybe expecting maybe the National Party of maybe like buying their way to power.
And in terms of the lead up to the elections, during the campaign, there were several incidents of violence. There was a mayoral candidate for Libre was assassinated in October, and also a congresswoman, the daughter of Berta Cáceres, the Lenca Indigenous Land and Water Protector. She was beaten in her own home, wasn't she?
Yes, she definitely was. There was definitely several acts of violence that happened, especially once the primaries began in October. As a matter of fact, the UN Human Rights Commission reported that there was 30 candidates and their families who had been murdered since October of last year, and 60 incidents of either fights, attacks, or any types of oppression acts have been reported since October of last year. Yes.
I wanted to bring Ciapa Portillo into the conversation, and I also wanted to go back in time. Ciapa Portillo is the Honduran scholar and associate professor at Pitzer College. Democracy Now! First spoke to Xiomara Castro in 2009. This was after the coup. It was an exclusive interview by phone just after the U.S.-backed coup overthrew her husband, President Zelaya, as she tried to return to Honduras from Nicaragua.
So, Dennis, what are your thoughts on this historic victory again for the left and for first women? I think it's president, of Honduras. That's looks like she's ahead by 20 points, by the way, with more than half the vote count. So and the ruling party has essentially conceded, so it's almost certain she's going to win. So Dennis, what are your thoughts about this election?
Uh,
And what it means again for, U.S. and Latin America, which of course I'm sure we're all, yeah.
Latin America is the front lines of the socialist, struggle. And it's anti-imperialist. I was very happy to see what happened there. Also, the socialist won in Venezuela, and there is a march for independence in Bolivia.
Right.
All these countries, including Nicaragua, are facing what do you call it again? Interference from the U.S. imperialism all the time. And anytime there's a victory for progressive forces, it's a victory for the people of the world. That's what I think.
Right.
I have a comment.
Okay, yeah.
Henry Kissinger must be having a real bad stomach ache about this.
Yes. Yeah, well, not as bad as he should be having,
That's about it.
What is he? He's over 90 now, right?
Yeah, I mean,
him and Dick Cheney, shows that there's no God.
Chile has made a big comeback from the 1973 coup.
Yeah.
And that's a good news too.
Although now it's like a fascist may win the next election, or a Pinochet essentially.
Well, we can look forward to the day that we can say Henry Kissinger and Dick Cheney are turning over in their graves.
Oh, I saw a good T-shirt out there about Kissinger to the Hague, for that, give him, with like a ticket, let's, send him to be tried as, the war criminal he is. But Gail, have you been following any of this or any thoughts? You got to mute though.
Not really, but I really don't like your putting on Amy Goodman. It disturbs me.
Okay, you're not a fan, huh?
It may not be a case of ethics, but it's a case of taste.
All right.
I mean, well, she put somebody on who she denominates high school teacher. Really?
Well, apparently that's what he. I guess he may be an activist too, but yeah, I don't know. That might not be her again. That's probably her producers who decide on the captions.
That's my case.
All right.
Well, I've been noticing with Amy, she's been going like a parrot a lot on her talking.
Yeah. Oh, like that. Okay. Oh.
And the people in Honduras,
I'm sure Jim would have some choice words too if he could get on.
There's a miracle about Amy Goodman. I don't think she's ever missed an episode.
Really? Huh.
Well, I don't. Maybe yeah. I don't watch it every day, but she's there at the anchor.
Right.
And maybe she has an assistant sometimes.
And she's a regular on all of the Pacifica stations, right? I mean, there's her whatever.
She's a regular everywhere. She's on Free Think Speech. I've seen her on many public access stations.
I forget. I think she's on MNN too.
Yeah. She goes on.
Good. Ask Jim about all of that. We could spend 3 days on.
Oh yeah, no. Jim can tell stories, although he might not want to burn those bridges.
Well, I'm independent. I'm not Chris Cuomo, and I think it's really okay. I can't stand one.
Well, we got Mike Jankowitz just joined us. Mike, we'll throw you into the water.
Audio is not up, so let's
connecting to audio.
And actually, that's a good segue because this next clip is one Mike will want to comment on, which is what happened in Barbados with them declaring themselves a republic, getting rid of the Queen, and all of that.
Oh, right.
So, well, that will
infuriate Michael.
Prince Charles was there, so we got that.
Well, let's play this.
The declaration of the world's newest republic was marked by celebrations. With the music, song, and dance that Barbados is so well known for. But above all, it was time for solemnity. Prince Charles arrived for the last time as the representative of the Queen, Barbados's head of state, marking the end of the British monarchy's ties with the island once known as Britain's Caribbean crown jewel.
The creation of this republic offers a new beginning, but it also marks a point on a continuum, a milestone on the long road you have not only traveled, but which you have built.
Then the British military flag was lowered, replaced by one that represents only Barbados, which now has a new president, Sandra Mason.
We now turn our vessel's bow towards the new republic. We do this so that we may seize the full substance of our sovereignty.
Barbados was Britain's first and most important slave colony, whose sugar fields produced vast wealth for the empire. It gained independence only 55 years ago, but retained the monarchy. Barbados became one of the Queen's 16 realms, but for many, the time had come to cut the umbilical cord with the monarchy. Duane, a Bajan, as Barbadians call themselves, sells tiny salty fruit that grows by the seaside, a specialty here. He agrees with the change.
I think it would be a public thing, but one of us is able to run the country, able to make some decisions.
But others, like 19-year-old Kashona, says that the decision to break with the monarchy was imposed on them by the Prime Minister without consultation.
It wasn't even explained. Just one day she said, it's republic, and that was it.
The new president will have a largely ceremonial role behind the Prime Minister, and Barbados will remain a part of the British Commonwealth, which Queen Elizabeth heads. This former Quaker plantation has been the residence of the Governor-General, the Queen's representative in Barbados, for the last 55 years. Now it will be the residence of this country's new president, making Barbados the world's youngest republic, at least for now. As a farewell present of sorts, the Prime Minister awarded Prince Charles the country's Medal of Freedom, and then announced another surprise, the nation's Hero Award to the country's most famous citizen, singer Rihanna, who was also an ambassador for Barbados. In practical terms, not that much will change. But for a great many here, no longer having to pay tribute to a monarchy that brought their ancestors here from Africa in chains is a change that was long overdue. Lucia Newman, Al Jazeera, Bridgetown, Barbados.
This is an aerial view of Jurupa Hills High School in Fontana, San Bernardino County in 2011, 10 years ago. And this is the neighborhood today. More than 20 warehouses now sit within a mile of the school, and there are plans to build more. Fontana has been called California's epicenter of warehouses. There are more than 50 of them, including centers for UPS and Amazon that take up more than 16 million square feet throughout the city. That's like 4.5 Disneylands. Their existence helps make it possible for us to buy something online and have it arrive at our door within hours. But all these mega warehouses come at a cost.
We're seeing thousands of trucks per day. Because they're right next to homes, it just spews all of these toxins right into your backyard.
The warehouses are getting very close to our communities and our schools. We have our students surrounded with warehouses.
Physicians have coined a phrase for the unfortunate properties that now neighbor the warehouses: diesel death zones. It's not just Fontana. Just look 10 miles east.
I'm standing in the passenger terminal of the San Bernardino Airport. It's totally empty. This place was supposed to offer flights to destinations such as Mexico. Instead, the community got something else entirely.
Amazon and others plan to use the expanded airport as a West Coast cargo hub to feed the demand of online shopping.
We know we can't shut this down, but we want to get something that would benefit us.
California's Office of Attorney General has taken notice of both projects, filing lawsuits against the city of Fontana and project developers in San Bernardino, challenging the warehouse and airport expansions.
I think this is another example of California leading the way, of showing what's possible.
I'm Evan Halper with the Los Angeles Times, and I'm reporting on California's novel efforts to help communities overburdened with pollution fight back.
In the last decade,
The Inland Empire has become a national logistics hub, due in part to the abundance of cheap land and its proximity to 2 major ports.
A lot of those imports, they get unloaded at the ports of Long Beach and LA, and they go through LA into Riverside and San Bernardino, and then from here, either through trucks or through freight, are pushed out to the rest of the country.
For the city of Fontana, that has meant the building of dozens of warehouses, often backing right up to residential areas and schools. In April, the city approved a new warehouse alongside Jurupa Hills High School, where 2,000 students are predominantly Latino and 83% of them qualify for free or reduced price meals. This caused an uproar. During a city council meeting in June, 53 community members spoke out against it because of the traffic and pollution it would cause.
PM 2.5 concentration is considered to be damaging to lungs when it's greater than 2.10 micrograms per milliliter. In Fontana, that level is 12. It's 12. If we put this warehouse in, we're going to have 2.5 levels as high as China. You understand, it damages us forever.
It's obvious that the southern residents have it worse. They bear all the burden of the warehouse industry, the shipping industry, Amazon. It's all in the south. It's all in the lower income areas, and it's messed up, man.
It's working out for you elected officials. It's not working for us.
The meeting lasted 3 hours.
Our concerns have fallen on deaf ears. We want a sustainable community, one with, where we can walk and breathe, and it doesn't seem to matter.
In the end, all but one city council member voted against the appeal to stop the project. But the project caught the attention of California's Attorney General, whose Environmental Justice Bureau filed a lawsuit against the city of Fontana in July, challenging the project.
There have been multiple warehouses already built near this community that was impacted, and there's 2 public high schools here. And so when the Sloban Oleander warehouse project was proposed, and it was expected to add a really high pollution burden, approximately 114 daily truck trips, 272 daily passenger car trips, we got involved.
The more traffic that we have, the longer those trucks idle while they're sitting in traffic. And so it spirals. It's the traffic that then contributes to the air pollution.
The surrounding neighborhood is already more polluted than 97% of the census tracts in the state. Meanwhile, Fontana's mayor, Aquanetta Warren, takes pride in her moniker, Warehouse Warren.
Fontana is open for business.
The city clearly benefits from these relationships. This year's State of the City address featured a gospel choir, barbershop quartet, and whatever this is.
You got to have friends.
Mayor Warren says that the warehouses will bring jobs to Fontana, which was struggling with high unemployment levels before the warehouse boom started about a decade ago.
Many think of these buildings as just warehouses, but they are job centers. I want to change the narrative right now. They are job centers.
Members of a local union agree. They were also present at that June City Council meeting in favor of the new warehouse project.
Personally, myself, I know and a lot of other brothers and sisters in my union have literally seen projects similar to this save people's lives last year during the pandemic.
These are the jobs that keep my members and my union brothers alive every day.
Our issue here with the warehouse development is ourselves. If there wasn't a demand on online shopping, we wouldn't have a need for warehouse development. So if we don't want warehouse developments, then we stop buying online.
But some say these warehouse jobs aren't good jobs.
I know the quality of these jobs and I see the high turnover of people. Like, people don't last. And so
yeah, it doesn't provide for sustainable living.
We want jobs that pay decent wages so that people can actually shop in our community. They can rent apartments in our community so that they could afford to live here. The warehouse jobs do not do that.
In nearby San Bernardino, an expansion of the airport was approved in December of 2019 that would host a 658,000 square foot air cargo warehouse for Amazon, drawing 26 flights and at least 500 truck trips daily, on top of the traffic already there from UPS, FedEx, and others. Then the Attorney General's office stepped in, accusing the Federal Aviation Administration, the local airport authority, and the project developers of overlooking the high asthma rates and other health problems suffered by the San Bernardino Muscogee community. CalEnviroscreen ranks the community in the top 5% of the state's most polluted areas, and more than 95% of the people in the mostly Latino community are living below the poverty level.
It's an environmental, justice issue. They see the land, they want to use the land, but then they also see people as cheap labor.
These have been communities that don't look to government for support because they haven't gotten support from government. We want the jobs to be created, we want the project to go forward, and we want it to be done in a responsible way.
Both lawsuits are still in court. Mayor Warren described settlement conversations underway in Fontana as substantive and meaningful. But she also said her critics are blaming warehouses for environmental problems that predate their construction. Fed-up residents, meanwhile, say they are encouraged that they are no longer shouting into the abyss.
To have the Attorney General's office be involved in this case and file a lawsuit against the city of Fontana is very validating. It sends a very loud and clear message that what the city is doing is not right.
To learn more, read the full story on LATimes.com and check out my United States of California series about the impact of California's agenda on the rest of the nation.
Okie doke. So
I have a comment if you don't.
All right, go, Gail.
I mean, it's just very amusing to me because I turned down further teaching jobs. I was teaching at UC Riverside for a few quarters. At the same time as I was working at the Getty Trust, it was really hard to do two jobs at the same time. However, having that UC Riverside job required me to drive. Life in your car, Ken.
Right.
And I had a little place to live because I couldn't stand the commuting. And they wanted me to keep teaching at Riverside. It was a couple hour, it always ended up like an hour, 3/4 or 2 hour drive. There was constant traffic. Even I used to look at in those days, slides, because I was teaching art history. I'd stay in Riverside sweating my next day's lecture until 1:30 in the morning, thinking there won't be any traffic. And then I'd start out, and I remember so clearly one night there was so much traffic, I wove my way through a 4-lane accident as it was happening. It's a miracle I'm alive. But the way I decided not to keep teaching at the vaunted University of California was that on the way to my wonderful teaching job, I was afraid. People used to, there were a lot of funny things. Everybody was from LA, and they would drive to Riverside to teach. One person would get dressed in her car because the commute was long and so annoying that that's how she did it. But I, for my part, had this offer hanging over me. And the chairman of the Department of Art History was the wife of my boss at the Getty. Okay. The Research Center, and they were fighting over me, which is
really
whatsoever. And I decided to get rid of the Riverside teaching because I was afraid to open the window. There was so much pollution outside my car window, about halfway between LA or Santa Monica and Riverside. You go through the wonderful Inland Empire. And in those days, you could cut the air with a knife. It was like Gary, Indiana.
Right.
That part of
I'm sure Ken can tell us about it too. Having lived there.
UC Riverside was an agricultural experimentation center for growing oranges initially. The air was pure and clean, and then it became totally polluted. So everybody on that broadcast, that clip you just showed, they're obviously too young to remember all that.
So if you had gone that other way, could you be a tenured professor at UC Riverside now, Gail?
Really blew it. Another stupid decision. But these people were fighting over me. I didn't know what to do. I didn't even know they were fighting over me. And then someone came and told me that. And then the husband cut my contract. So then I had no work at all. So
Wow.
But it wasn't a bad place. I had master's students. I didn't have any PhDs, but it was okay. I mean, it was sort of mezzo.
Mensa. Yeah. The people in LA are superficial and insincere.
All right. You're right.
But that's just the culture. That is the culture. And it's like Hollywood. Everything looks like, the stone castle or the gates of Lebanon. It's all made out of plaster. The plastic surgery. You look at this gorgeous girl in the supermarket, and you find she's 95 years old, got Botox. That's Hollywood, It's shallow and insincere. Don't take it so sensitive. But the advantage to that is you could walk up to anybody and say, "Hi, my name is Jack. I'm a neurosurgeon." And then the guy's going to go, "Okay."
But to get back to the topic at hand, though, I mean, this does look like essentially they're turning this, the inland empire into a corporate sacrifice zone.
Well, yeah, but it's gonna
again, like they say, where all the poor people live, there we dump our toxic waste, we pollute their air, etc.
No, it goes
and
both ways.
They can show that they do. Corporations do that. They deliberately, dump all their shit essentially, because then people there can't fight back politically. They don't have the power to get. So that's why pipelines go through indigenous lands and not through the middle of some white city.
They're not indigenous lands. Come on, Alex. Don't always extend the argument.
That's right. That's right. The point is, look at the logistics. The point I'm bringing it up is, it isn't politics. It's logistics. You got the stuff coming in from China. It comes into San Pedro and Long Beach. It goes up a corridor. It goes out to where the warehouses are in a flat territory, and then is distributed by train and truck across the country.
Or plane, I guess.
And it has to flow, and it has to sit somewhere. You can't go instant off, immediately to shelf from China to New Jersey. So,
Bel Air. It should go to Bel Air.
Bel Air, right.
Really?
No, Bel Air's up in the hills. You don't want someplace flat. But maybe the Tesla trucks will help. Electric trucks will cut down the pollution, electric cars. And the worst thing there is not the pollution. It's just flat. There's nothing to do. There's nothing. You got Walmart, and that's it. You want to go to Walmart? Okay.
I take it you've been out there, Ken.
Nothing to do there.
Supermarket.
Riverside has a very nice hotel, but that's about it. A classic hotel.
The 19th century hotel.
Yeah, it's great. It's great.
I heard it was restored. I never saw it.
Oh, you're never there? Well, come on out.
Go by it. It's life in your car. Let's face it. That's what Riverside County is. Life in your
California
car.
is.
It's east of LA, that's all.
But there are mountain lions there, Ken, right?
What?
Coyote.
Mountain lions? No,
Coyote.
out there the snakes. Mountain lions are in the mountains. You got Big Bear and Arrowhead. That's where you get your mountain.
No, but in Riverside, people had mountain lions behind their apartment.
Okay.
Really?
They're all gone now.
I think those are just escaped from a Michael Jackson pet farm.
Video.
No, he had farms up there with all kinds of
really?
exotic animals. He's giraffes and stuff. Kept the children amused,
Yeah,
the guests.
Well, we know what else he did with the children.
That's right. LA's great. LA's great. You notice, of course they were whining and complaining about how tough everything is, but you see, they're kind of chill. There's very little attitude. It's not like New Yorkers, Hey, there's none of that.
Well,
you don't get that there. It's
why isn't there
that's
any
a good part
zoning?
of New York.
Why is there no zoning?
The zoning is changing.
So why don't they have zoning? It's the obvious solution. They can zone it the way they want.
Well, no.
It's zone for.
No, it was explained. They got jobs. They want the jobs. It used to be, let's say, it was agricultural. So you had farmland, then you had too much population, and there's not enough jobs for not. You don't need that many people on a farm. They needed jobs, so now they got warehouse jobs.
And that's not good enough.
One after the other, and there was jobs in terms of constructing the warehouses, and it's whatever it is. It's commerce. It's population. I think At the end of the day, we really should be giving out licenses to how many kids you can have. I mean, that's the story. You got to start controlling the population. Right? You know. And I don't know. I grew up. I mean, nobody ever said this to me, and nobody ever mentioned it. But you don't have a kid unless you can afford to have a kid. Maybe I saw it in a couple of movies. Somebody says, "Oh, I just started work. I can't afford to support a child." And you don't have more kids than you can support. Well, that's the way I grew up.
I just
a lot of kids.
It's a very.
A lot of kids nowadays can't afford. Yeah.
Yeah. Now they can't afford. They think they can't afford it.
Well,
so that's everything. So we can chit chat. Or I have one other thing. Well, I don't even remember what it was. Do you have anything else?
Yeah. Well, we have again this big well, they're going to do it. The Chinese giving, well, not just donating 1 billion vaccine doses.
But
Africa.
I think that vaccine doesn't work that well.
Yeah, but it's good. It's essentially good enough.
They're
not gonna turn it down, and we're not. The West isn't stepping up, so China's getting a march on us.
Alex, where's it going?
Well, it's to Africa. They're also going to do medical projects. They're talking about over $1 billion to help out.
Nigeria, Kenya, Ethiopia, Sudan,
all over.
Congo.
I mean, I'll play the clip from Xi. He talks about what the
video link at the Forum for China-Africa Cooperation on Monday. President Xi Jinping said 600 million shots would be donations, and 400 coming from other means, such as joint production between Chinese companies and relevant African countries.
In order to achieve the goal of getting 60% of the African population vaccinated against COVID by 2022, I announce that once again, China will send 1 billion doses of COVID-19 vaccines to African nations. 600 million of which will be granted as aid.
China has already provided nearly 200 million vaccines to the continent. Vaccination rates have lagged behind wealthier parts of the world. Xi also said China would build 10 health projects in Africa and send 1,500 health experts. Chinese companies will be encouraged to spend no less than $10 billion in the continent over the next 3 years.
China will never forget its deep friendship with the African nations and will continue to uphold the principles of truth, the correct view of justice, and to work with African friends, allowing China and African countries to build a good spirit of cooperation from generation to generation, and to develop together.
The announcement comes amid criticism of China's infrastructure for commodities deals that some say saddle countries with unsustainable debt. Last week, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken, without naming China, criticized international infrastructure deals that are, quote, opaque and coercive. Said Washington would be pursuing cleaner deals.
Well, so, I mean, this is definitely good diplomacy for China. Going to get credit. This is going to help them in their, struggle with us, basically. But yeah, and certainly, again, we could make the point that there might not be an Omicron variant if, we're talking about it quite a bit, back when the vaccines first came out, the necessity to vaccinate the rest of the world if we wanted to prevent new variants. So, here at least China's doing something where the West isn't.
Know what, Alex? They invented it in the first place, for Christ's sake.
Well, again, and if they did invent it, Gail, they should have a better vaccine.
No.
Actually, we can't even this country. We can't even vaccinate everybody in my neighborhood. I mean,
no.
I think. Well, yes, this is not you don't live in a totalitarian neighborhood. I know, But I think Gail is right. It obviously came, more data is coming out, and it was just discussed in the Congress. It definitely came from the Wuhan lab. I knew that 2 days after it hit the news. I heard the Batwoman say, it was translated. She says, oh, we were working on this. We were trying to get it, take the bat virus and make it contagious amongst human beings. It wasn't easy. We had to work on it. And, that's what she said. That was right at the beginning. She's the lead. She's in charge of all of the development.
Validity, Ken, I'm sorry.
Yeah. Okay.
Wait, is that
She's just no.
The Chinese lady who developed the
look.
virus.
They've remember Biden announced there's a new investigation. The fact that nothing's been said about it means they didn't find anything new.
Oh, so come on! No, that's not true.
Come on, Ken. You think if they had, well, given the way we're gearing up for Cold War 2.0, if they had proved that China was the lab, their lab that was responsible, they would be, going 24/7 about it. So obviously,
no. There's diplomacy. There's certain things you have to deal with. And in fact, there are virologists around the world. Virologists around the world were exchanging samples and viruses from the U.S., from Palm Springs, from Frankfurt, Germany. They just trade. They're all scientists. They're working on this. So everybody, there's a lot of culpability. But I think it's fine. It's like, I hope China helps Africa. It's kind of a relief. I'd rather that China did that than put it on our budget. That's good. Nothing wrong with that. Let them go in there and build roads and houses and ATMs and vending machines or whatever they do, and teach them all to drink tea and build houses with pagodas. Well, it's fine.
And any of you have friends from Georgia, not the state, the country? Because I got a clip.
I know a few people from Georgia.
I got a clip on the Saakashvili trial, which is interesting. The guy's an idiot. He's under indictment. He thinks he can slip back into the country and start a revolution to put himself back in power, but instead he gets arrested, and now he's probably going to jail because he was a corrupt, like all of them were.
Okay, well let's watch that.
Yeah. This is Al Jazeera. This is a fun one.
Just don't overrun it.
This was Mikhail Saakashvili's first public appearance in Georgia since his return from exile and arrest. The former president is accused of violently dispersing anti-government protesters and raiding an opposition TV channel while in office. Weakened by a 50-day hunger strike, Saakashvili addressed the international community in English about his prison treatment.
This was a classical case against me of torture, inhuman and degrading behavior that inflicted lots of damage on me personally and on my nation.
Outside the court, Saakashvili's supporters listened to the proceedings on social media. They believe it's a show trial.
This is a disgrace for the country, for the institution of the president, and for our ability to go forward as a society and pursue our Euro-Atlantic goals. I mean, prospects of Georgia joining the European Union look rather grim when presidents are being prosecuted on political grounds.
There were scuffles as police dispersed protesters who had blocked traffic. 15 people were arrested.
The drama of the proceedings going on inside the court have been somewhat overshadowed by the chaos ensuing outside when police did their best to try to stop Mikhail Saakashvili's supporters from blocking both roads into and out of the city.
Mikhail Saakashvili came back to Georgia from Ukraine after 8 years in exile, but was arrested on the 1st of October. He has returned to a divided country between those who believe Georgia's now controlled by a pro-Russian oligarch and those who want Saakashvili to serve time for crimes they say he's committed. The government insists Saakashvili will get a fair trial.
His rights will be fully protected by the legislation of Georgia. As it happens, today he has had the opportunity to appear in court before the Georgian judiciary.
His supporters don't expect justice, and nor does Saakashvili. His best defense was this confession.
It was a mistake that in government we failed to create an independent justice system. It affected many of my compatriots, and now it affects me.
The former president used this opportunity to address the Georgian public directly. His hope is that somehow they, and not the court, will decide his fate. Robin Forestier-Walker, Al Jazeera, Tbilisi.
Doesn't sound to me like that's much of a hope for him. That didn't look like, some kind of mass protest by his supporters. So I'm guessing he'll probably wind up in, we'll have to see if how fair the trial is, but yeah. I mean, his reputation is that he was corrupt and, authoritarian somewhat in dealing with his political enemies, which is why he had to flee the country in the first place. So, I'm sure there's enough to get him. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I've got observations.
And you said you had some Georgian friends. What,
oh yeah. No.
This stuff?
I can't remember, but it was part of a film festival.
Oh yeah.
But I mean, it's remarkable watching these videos. They have concrete streets. I mean, paved streets, concrete sidewalks. Everybody's well dressed with proper apparel. They all had haircuts. The guy who said he was on a 50-day hunger strike, he must have hired somebody to do it for him, because he certainly didn't look malnourished to me.
No.
And there's a courthouse. It's not like what I might imagine in a
right.
backward country like Georgia or something. It isn't.
No.
It's very westernized, right?
Yeah.
And I didn't see people. They look like they have better dental work than the people in London. Yeah,
it's a former Soviet country. I mean, plenty of, it's in the Caucasus. That's a long history, and
Yeah, so that's okay. So he's got a lot of nerve going back there, doesn't he?
Well, yeah, again, he thought he would sneak in and, spark a revolution or something to put himself back in power. Instead, he got arrested.
In regards to just since
maybe he got tired. He must have gotten tired of the Ukrainian food.
Going back to the thing with Ukraine and NATO, did you do you mentioned, I think, towards the beginning of the show that NATO, I don't know if you said NATO came out with a statement warning Russia to back off from the Ukraine. Did you report that earlier?
Well, actually, NATO very pointedly today said essentially they won't fight for Ukraine, or at least as the Russian, state media TASS reported. They made some comment about, well, we're by treaty we have to defend our members, but partners like the Ukraine, essentially, we're not going to, they essentially, without directly, they essentially said, we're not going to fight for Ukraine. So, but yeah, they've been, warning the Russians, not to do anything.
Okay, well, let me. I don't get that.
Said we won't fight for Ukraine. So,
but I got where they did say they would fight for the Ukraine. Let me play that up and correct that. Okay, just one second. There we go. And here it is.
Ministers have met in Latvia to discuss a response to Russia's military build-up on Ukraine's border. About a month ago, the US reported that Russian troops were gathering in large numbers in several cities near the Russian border with Belarus and Ukraine. Russia says it's entitled to station its troops on its territory and insists they pose no threat. But NATO and Ukraine say Moscow may be preparing to launch an attack.
The meeting of NATO's top diplomatic ministers comes at a tense time. They have pledged their support to Ukraine and are calling on Russia to stand down.
We stand united in our aim to deter Russia from any further aggressive actions. We call on Russia to be transparent, de-escalate and reduce tensions. Any future Russian aggression against Ukraine would come at a high price. and have serious political and economic consequences for Russia.
The appeal follows growing concern over Russian troops seen massing near the Ukraine border in early November. The build-up sparked fears of a possible invasion. Ukraine responded with its own show of force, military exercises in the border region.
We have complete control over our borders, and we are fully prepared for any escalation.
Tensions are rising between Russia and the West over Ukraine's renewed bid to join the NATO military alliance. For the Kremlin, any expansion of military aid to Ukraine is a red line. What are we to do in such a scenario? We will then have to create something similar in relation to those who threaten us in that way, and we have the capacity to do so. Ukraine already had a war scare with Russia earlier this year. In April, Russia deployed thousands of troops within striking distance of Ukraine. Moscow called it a military exercise and then said the troops were being withdrawn. Western military experts say the maneuvers this November were less visible, perhaps on purpose.
We don't have clarity into Moscow's intentions, but we do know its playbook.
This is the latest in several attempts at peace talks. Tensions remain, with no end in sight.
I'm joined now by Artis Pabriks, Latvia's Defence Minister. Mr. Pabriks, thanks for joining DW. The US and other NATO allies are worried about a Russian invasion of Ukraine. Do you share those concerns?
Yes, I do share those concerns because Russia is following revisionist policy for the last decade or so. So it has been invading Georgia, it has been invading Ukraine, it is basically controlling now almost all activities within Belarus. So that means that we can expect any type of challenge, and we know that Russian political elite is not afraid to use military force when it decides it suits to their purposes.
US Secretary of State Antony Blinken has warned Russia that any aggression in Ukraine would trigger serious consequences. What do you think NATO how do you think NATO should respond?
Well, one question is how NATO as an organization should respond, but I would also ask a question, how do separate nations and European countries are responding to the crisis or possible crisis between Ukraine and Russia? And I'm kind of a little bit ashamed, coming from the Baltic countries, knowing also our history, when there have been still 20, 30 years ago talks about red lines, we cannot, just challenge, we should step back. You see, I'm ashamed that there are only few countries which in the last 5 years have been actually capable and willing to support Ukraine, also militarily, because this is a nation which is standing for its borders, for its freedoms. And at this moment, if I'm correct, there is only Canada, United Kingdom and United States, which is ready to sell, for instance, military equipment to Ukrainian army and to assist with also their transformation of the army, while other European nations are thinking that if they will not support Ukraine, they can preserve peace. Peace is a very good thing, but sometimes by thinking about peace, we make appeasement, and actually we are playing according to the playbook of Kremlin, and this is not a good thing. This is not bringing us closer to security and peace. We should support Ukraine.
Well, what would you say then to other European nations and other NATO member allies? What should they be doing?
Well, I think we have been delayed with certain things, but for instance, Latvia, together with Poland and Lithuania, is willing to send a European Union military education mission to Ukraine to assist to transform Ukrainian military forces. This project is still on the hold, still on the delay. Secondly, I think we simply should engage with Ukraine, not only on humanitarian part, which we are giving them a humanitarian assistance, not only on political reform, not only to speak about corruption. These are important things, because Ukraine should become more European country, but that involves also a military cooperation, because this country is defending its borders, and this country have been seeing a bloody war where it's part of its territory have been occupied by Russian forces. There is nothing to do, and I think we should also in media use the right language, there is nothing to do with separatists, because so-called separatists, which are for instance in Donbass, I apologize for my language, but they can't make a step to the right and left without acceptance from the Russian military forces. So this is the truth, and we should deliver this truth to our people and politicians.
Mr. Pabriks,
I'm cutting it there. Because
I'm sure he loves to fight to the last American,
but I'm just correcting that NATO put out a positive statement.
Right, but you'll notice carefully if you parse the language, nowhere do they say we will fight to defend Ukraine. So it doesn't. And again, TASS had, the Russian state media. They pointedly pointed to a statement from NATO that essentially said, we're not going to fight. We have no treaty obligation to defend the Ukraine.
Yeah, but so my question on it was, just in terms of strategies that we were talking about the other night, there's other countries to the south of Russia, the stands.
Yeah.
Kazakhstan. Are they just no problem with any of these things? Or Georgia? They just don't have anything to distract them? That they can take the time to go.
Like you said, I mean, the Georgians are under a pro-Russian government now. When Saakashvili tried to deal with his separatists, he got smacked down hard by the Russian. They essentially smashed the Georgian military in like 2 days, and Saakashvili had it was complete fool. He had the idea because people like, Senator McCain, this is back in 2008, I guess it got in him in the idea that NATO would fight the Russians for Georgia. So he had, like a green light to essentially go fight the Russians, essentially the Russians could have marched to Tbilisi because they had totally destroyed the Georgian army.
Well,
and they separated these two, was it South Ossetia and Abkhazia that are that are Russian enclaves essentially, and they're
Well,
everybody's happy because they're back in the fold, Georgia anyway.
Yeah, but I mean, the world would be better off if we have a European bloc facing up to the Eastern Bloc, because Russia's got this CSTO, this group of states that they have their own military pact similar to NATO, but that's okay. So those things can be in balance, opposed to us sending in the Marines.
We can get Frank back on the show because Mike can tell you, Frank, we have a long-running.
Frank wants to go to war, right?
Frank's retired military, so he's got and he served in NATO in Germany in the 80s against the Red Army. So he's not a fan of the Russians in general. But no, Frank, we have this long-running argument with Frank. Frank thinks the Chinese army is going to cross through Russia and invade Europe at some point. We've had this. They're going to, the Chinese will just, appear in, Poland someday.
Okay, has anybody got anything for closing? Otherwise, we're going to end off here. Jim's not going to be coming back, and I'm going to close it off.
I did want to
go ahead.
add a song. Let me.
Go ahead. Pull it
go on. I just wanted to ask you, Alex. Did Frank say that China was going to cross over to invade the United States by going through the center of the earth?
He might have that opinion.
No. Excuse me. China has already invaded the United States.
Right. Oh.